we have been discussing systems of classification of ragas in Hindustani music, and we saw that Mela and Raganga Paddhati are two systems that are in use in contemporary performance practices. The Raga Ragini system is of historical interest and is no longer used. Now, both Mela and Raganga, they serve as tools to make the large number of ragas manageable, to create some connections between them, to see how one raga is similar to another raga or different from another raga. So all these things really help to make the large number of ragas manageable for the performer. The Raganga and Mela Paddhati also have pedagogical value, and certainly Raganga is more useful, more insightful from the performance point of view. And as I mentioned, both Mela and Raganga are used simultaneously depending on the context. The Hindustani music, the world of Hindustani music does not see an either or situation here. It is not as if you have to belong to one camp or the other. Most musicians freely use both systems of classification to really get a hold on the large number of ragas that are in practice. Because you see, the two systems of classification, as I have mentioned before, pivot around different aspects of ragas. The Mela system revolves around the notes that are used in ragas. So the mere, one might say, physical aspect of the raga, just what notes are used. Whereas Raganga revolves around the phrases, the chalan, the phrases and their ucharan, more importantly, right? How they are rendered. The same phrase, let's say, if we have nipa, you can render it in different ways. The ucharan can be different, and that makes for different ragangas. Now, both have limitations, both Mela and Raganga Paddhati, they have limitations. Not every raga can be unproblematically classified under a Mela, or under the Mela system or under the Raganga system. There are always problems, and as far as the Raganga Paddhati goes, who is to say how many Ragangas are there, right? So again, as I've mentioned, there are differences of opinion about the number of Ragangas. But the performance tradition, as I said, uses this in a very pragmatic way. There is no seeking after the perfect classification system, and we don't have musicologists also trying to offer a perfect classification system for ragas. Perhaps this is just a recognition of the fact that ragas are really quite unclassifiable. Each raga is unique, and coming up with a perfect classification system might well be impossible. The Raganga Paddhati is certainly more useful for the performer because it does give insights into how a certain phrase has to be handled. So if you know that it belongs to, say, Kannada Ang, then thereby we know that the Gandhara, the Ga, occupies a certain position on the Shruti gamut, and that it has to be shaken in a certain way. So Raganga Paddhati does offer insights to the performer. The Mela system does have a weaker presence, and most musicians pay lip service to it. It's not dismissed, but it is not treated with great seriousness. In Carnatic music, on the other hand, the 72 Mela system has a considerable hold. You will remember that when the 72 melas were propounded, this was in the 17th century, most of those 72 had no practical application. That is, there were no ragas in circulation at that time that used many of those scales or portions, derivatives of those scales. In fact, Venkatamakin himself only named 19 of those 72 melas. The naming of the rest of them came later. His successor, he named the rest of the 72. So remember again that in the earlier treatises, when mela system was being propounded, the number of melas were much smaller, 19, 12, 23, in keeping with the requirements of performance tradition. And Bhatkhande again, he carried forth that approach to the mela system, and he only propounded, he said that we only need 10 melas or 10 thats to account for or to classify all the prevalent ragas in Hindustani music. But what happened in Carnatic music is that though many of the scales were not in use, many of the scales or their derivatives were not ragas, even though that was the case, it was only a matter of time before these new and exotic scales or their derivatives began to be rendered as ragas. See, we have hundreds and hundreds of possible scales in various combinations, whether Sampurna, there is all 7 up and down, or 5 and 7, or 5 and 5, the Audava Shadava Sampurna schema, if you take that, there are hundreds of scales possible. But there's only a fraction of ragas. Fraction of that is actually found as ragas. So all these other possibilities, as I said, it was only a matter of time before Carnatic musicians started rendering these scales as ragas. So, in a sense, the new exotic scales were given life, right? Life was breathed into these scales and they emerged as ragas, and even today lots of these new ragas are in circulation, and many of them are quite captivating. Though they don't have the challenge inbuilt in them that traditional ragas have, and therefore they are less interesting. There is these newer ragas, so to say, that were essentially crafted out of new possibilities of scales. They had no definite personality, right? They were just scales and could be treated anyhow. And as opposed to ragas, traditional ragas that have evolved in the musical community over a long time, through the work or through the music of many musicians, right? So that the newer scale-based ragas are contrived. They are contrived, and that makes them less interesting. Now, in Hindustani music, the creation of new ragas from new concocted scales is relatively less prevalent. As I said, one can think of a hitherto unused, unheard of scale and render it as a raga. One can do that. But this is what has happened to quite an extent in Carnatic music. And we do have a few stray cases in Hindustani music, but by and large, Hindustani musicians haven't gone down this path. Well-established ragas are preferred, and novelty by way of new scales is not that enthusiastically sought after. And this is perfectly fine and healthy, because you see, a raga is not a scale, as I've said many times, and one can't really bestow a personality upon a scale at the individual's level. This is something, the personality of a raga is something that accrues over many years within the community. So, how about the repertoire of ragas then? Is it stagnant? I mean, doesn't it grow? Because certainly in Carnatic music, the repertoire, the number of ragas, has increased exponentially because of this propensity to create new ragas out of new scales. In Hindustani music, as I said, it is not so prevalent. So how then, what about the repertoire of ragas, and is it static? Certainly not. The repertoire of the ragas that are being performed today, that corpus is not the same that was performed 100 years ago. And that was not the same that was performed 200 years ago. So the corpus of ragas does change. Ragas change subtly, very subtly, but they do change themselves. I want to go over two ways in which the repertoire of ragas has been increased in Hindustani music. And these are, one of them is ragas that are imported from Carnatic music. There has been give and take. Carnatic music has taken ragas from Hindustani music, and Hindustani music has taken ragas from Carnatic music. What they do with it is quite different. And I will talk about how a couple of Carnatic ragas that are basically South Indian in origin, how they have been worked upon, how they have been assimilated into the Hindustani tradition. The two ragas are Hamsadhwani and Abhogi Kannada. Abhogi is the name of the Carnatic raga, and it is given a Kannada ang in the Hindustani tradition, and that is very interesting. How this little extra feature is inbuilt, or is kind of inserted into the raga, into Abhogi, to give it a very distinctly Hindustani flavor. Both Abhogi, Kannada and Hamsadhwani are well integrated into the Hindustani tradition, Hindustani performance tradition, and they are performed in all three genres, that is Khayal, Drupad and instrumental music. Let's take Hamsadhwani first. Hamsadhwani is a pentatonic, Audava raga. So is Abhogi. We'll come to that later, but Hamsadhwani is goes like this. The basic scale is this. Sari ga pani sani pa gari gari sa. This is the bare skeleton of the scale. The Carnatic music, the way Carnatic music treats ragas is very different from the raga lakshanas, or the way we handle ragas is very different from how you handle them in Hindustani music. So the concept of Vadi, Samvadi, Nyasaswar, they are there, but in a very different form. Especially Vadi, Samvadi are not really part of how ragas are treated in Carnatic music. So in Carnatic music, Hamsadhwani goes like this. Pagari sana gari sani sapa pani sadiri ga pagari ni pa gari sani gari sani pa gari sa. So the Carnatic music really is very much more phrase oriented. Very dense clusters of tight knit phrases. That is how Carnatic music goes. You know, the ragas are explored like this. Now, when Hamsadhwani was taken up by Hindustani musicians, what they did was they made Rishabha, Re, the Nyasaswara, and also the Vadi. Vadi Samvadi of Hamsadhwani are Rishabha and Re and Pa. So it sounds like this. When you sing it in Hindustani, in the Hindustani idiom, there is a Khayal idiom more specifically. Pa ga re ga re ni pa pa sa. So this prayoga or this combination, this pasa phrase is very important in the Hindustani Hamsadhwani, which is not so in Carnatic. And again, the stopping on the re in such a very deliberate manner. So again, the way Hamsadhwani has been given a form in Hindustani music. Pa re ni sa re ga pa re ga re ni pa sa sa ni sa ga re ga pa ni pa pa ni sa re ni pa ga re ga pa sa ni ga re ni pa ga pa sa pa ga re pa ga re ni pa pa sa. So that is how Hamsadhwani has assumed a very distinctive form in Hindustani music. See, though in Carnatic music, when we sing Hamsadhwani, we don't really, think of Re as an Nyasaswara or, or as a Vadi and all that. We don't do that because, as I said, it's very phrase oriented, clusters of phrases, and much more than Hindustani music. But if you actually analyze Hamsadhwani as it is sung in Carnatic music, it does seem that Re is a favored place of ending swaras. Though, it's not as if Ga is not or Pa is not. But it does seem that way. And it seems that when the Hindustani musicians took Hamsadhwani for Carnatic music, they listened to it with those lenses, right? And they were able to give a very typical Hindustani flavor to Hamsadhwani. The story of Abhogi is also very interesting. Abhogi is another pretty old raga in Carnatic music, and that is also pentatonic. The basic scale of Abhogi is sa ri ga ma da sa ra ma ga ri sa ri ga ri sa ri da sa ri ga ma ga ri sa. These are some phrases of Abhogi. Ga ma ga ri sa ri ga ma ri ga sa ri sa da na ga ri sa ri da sa ri ga ma ga ma da sa da ma ga ma da sa da ma ga ma ga ri sa. So when it was adopted into Hindustani music, it was given a Kannada ang. The Kannada ang, one of the Kannada angs is this Gamari phrase with a particular oscillation of ga. The Kannada ang is one of the main aspects of it is this. Ga re da. So that is the Kannada ang. Da sa re ga ma re sa. Da sa re ga ma re sa. De ga ga de ra na de ra na sada ga re da. So sada ga re. So that sada ga re da. Da sa re ga re ga ma re sa. So this is how Bhogi, which was taken from Carnatic music, is given the Kannada ang, and it was assimilated into Hindustani music in a much more interesting manner. That is, it is not just that you take the scale of the raga that is Hamsadhvani or Abhogi, but you actually invest that scale with a particular personality. And that is what has happened in the case of Hamsadhvani and Abhogi Kannada. The other strategy for through which new ragas have come into circulation in Hindustani music is the astonishing phenomenon of Jod ragas, and we will look at this in the next video.